sir. Welcome to this session on a very important issue today. I think the molecule hydroxychloroquine has been there for quite some time, but of late in last couple of months, the molecule which has been talked and discussed is, I think, if there's any system of TRP rating, this would rate as #1 molecule searched by doctors as well as patients and politicians everywhere. Not only it has been used for tens of years now, at the same time, the molecule has been used for many other conditions also. We have today evening to talk about this molecule and its role in COVID era in different, with different modalities, in different responsibilities. We have Dr. Anil Parikh with us, who is the President of Medical Affairs and Clinical Research with Ipca Laboratories. And we know that Ipca has been phenomenal in making, procuring, supplying, and making this molecule available to a large part of the world at present. Dr. Parikh has been from Bombay, and from where he did his MD in internal medicine and worked as consultant also in the Nair Hospital. At present, working as the president, we can understand how much would he be interested in this molecule to be presented to the scientific world in the right perspective. So I invite him without wasting any time for him to talk about how hydroxychloroquine has been repurposed, especially in this COVID era, and what are the implications and long-term use effects, side effects, and whatever we wish to know here. So there are lot many issues. I really invite Dr. Anil Parikh. Dr. Parikh, it's all yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Pandey, respected chairperson, and all colleagues who have, doctors who have logged in from across the country on this platform today's evening CME. At the outset, let me thank Dr. Maloria for giving me this opportunity to speak to you on a topic which I'm really, on a drug which I'm very passionately involved for last more than a decade. I think, let me share the screen with you. So this drug has been, as Dr. Pandey said, that this drug has been very widely, has received a very wide publicity for both good as well as bad. And during this pandemic, I think there are very few drugs which have received so much publicity and continues to be widely discussed and debated. But our interest in this drug was much earlier to this COVID pandemic. And we have done some work, which will also I'll talk briefly about that work. And now just going on to the COVID-19 brief timeline. On 31st December 2019, a series of pneumonia cases were reported by China to WHO. And then the clock started ticking. And then on 11th January, first case was reported outside China in Thailand. And then on 30th January, India reported the first case and WHO declared it as a medical emergency. Then we can see that 11th February, WHO, the disease rapidly spread and WHO gave the name COVID-19 to the disease. Then other countries also getting rapidly involved. The disease spread to Iran, then to Italy and several other countries. And on 11th March, the WHO declared a pandemic. And as of yesterday, on 25th October, USA is reporting more than 7 million cases, and India is reporting almost over 5.8 million cases. So India is also, I think, is on the path to becoming the #1 country cases-wise, though mortality-wise, we hope not, but number of cases infected-wise. So that's the story. So what exactly is COVID-19 infection? It is caused by coronavirus, which are a family of RNA viruses that primarily target human respiratory system. And previous outbreaks by the coronavirus has been called as the severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS-CoV, and Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS. And that's how this coronavirus is different from the earlier one, and hence it is called as SARS-CoV-2. And this began in Wuhan, and the origin is supposed to be from the bat-derived coronaviruses, and which through an unknown intermediate host, they have spread to humans. This is the life cycle of the SARS-CoV-2 virus in the host cells. It gets entry via the ACE2 receptors located on the host cell, and then it gets attached and gets internalized and into the endosomes, and then subsequently there is a release of RNA, and this RNA gets translated into viral replicase polyproteins, and then subsequently into viral RNAs by RNA polymerases. Many virions are assembled, and then finally they are released and they infect other cells. So that's the whole life cycle of, in short, of SARS-CoV-2 inside the host cells. Now, what are the therapeutic options? Naturally, when the disease first began, very little was known about this disease, pathophysiology, and naturally there were no drugs known for this drug, and to have a new drug for specifically for this disease is obviously going to take a lot of time, which can be developed for this. Even the option of vaccine is not going to be easy. It is going to be, although the life cycle, people are attempting to shorten the vaccine development phase, but still it is some time away, and we still don't know the safety and efficacy. That it still needs to be clinically tested. So the best option remains to tackle the disease is to repurpose the existing drugs, and that's what has been done somewhat, and that repurposing has been prioritized naturally, because to get a new drug specifically, research for this disease is going to take a long time. So this is the life cycle and the potential drug targets, how the the virus enters through the AC receptors, and here its entry can be, adhesion can be blocked. Then there are principally our interest is hydroxychloroquine, where it inhibits the entry of the drug at by causing glycosylation of the ACE2 receptors, and also its multiplication inside the endosomes. And then we have the drugs like remdesivir and favipiravir, which affects the RNA polymerase and the viral multiplication. And then you have, once the disease is rampant, there is a release of interleukins due to the inflammatory processes, and this interleukins, to stop these interleukin adverse effects, you use interleukin antagonists like IL-6 antagonists, tocilizumab, sarilumab. These have been utilized. The steroids have been primarily used to reduce the damage to the cytokine damage to the lungs as an anti-inflammatory primarily. So this is in brief the various targets for this particular drug. Now coming to hydroxychloroquine in COVID-19, which is our principal interest, today's topic, efficacy. The postulated mechanism of action of COVID-19 is that, as I said, that it interferes with the terminal glycosylation of the cellular ACE2 receptors, and thereby inhibiting the virus and receptor binding, and just thus evading the infection. One thing about hydroxychloroquine, by all its mechanism of action, whether it is the immunomodulatory effect or this antiviral effect or other effects, are principally the drug is a weak base, and thus it gets accumulated in the cells, endosomes and lysosomes, and alters the pH there. And this results in inhibition of nucleic acid replication and formation of the new virus particle transport and virus disease. Another mechanism of action is through its inhibition of the toll-like receptors TLR7 and TLR9, and there's subsequently their binding to their ligands, and it inhibits the pro-inflammatory signaling and inhibition Okay. Go back. Okay. Okay. So I was just discussing about the possible mechanisms other than antiviral effect. So these are it interferes with the glycosylation of the ACE2 receptors where the virus binds, and this interferes in the binding of the virus particle with the target cell. And most importantly, HCQ is a weak base, and it preferentially, because of this, it preferentially accumulates in the intracellular compartments like the endosomes, lysosomes, and this results in increase in pH at that site, and this causes inhibition of nucleic acid replication and formation of the new virus particles and the virus release. Another mechanism is that because of the altered pH in the endosomes, the binding between toll-like receptors, TLR7 and TLR9, this binding is inhibited to their RNA and DNA ligands, and this interferes with the pro-inflammatory signaling, and it interferes with the production and release of the various inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and TNF. So that's another mechanism in COVID-19, because it's an acute inflammatory stage and there is a cytokine storm. So possibly having the beneficial effect in there. Then now, after, since almost 6 months have passed, some things are becoming more clear who are non-diabetic. So it's a two-way relationship between diabetes and COVID-19. And there are increased coagulopathy, hypercoagulable state. There are formation of antiphospholipid antibodies which are seen in patients who are having COVID-19. I hope I am audible now. Okay, so COVID-19, which is described now as a hypermetabolic, hyperinflammatory, and hypercoagulable state. So apart from the postulated antiviral effects, how hydroxychloroquine can exert beneficial effects in COVID-19 by in terms of reducing blood glucose, in terms of anti-inflammatory, since primarily it's an anti-inflammatory drug. It has known antiplatelet effects. It also reduces antiphospholipid antibodies. So these are the actions which are already known for many years. This is not a new information. So this is how I was interested, as I was telling that I am interested in this drug because I was instrumental in this drug getting approved in India in 2001 in rheumatoid arthritis. That was the first approval. The drug was not approved for malaria, but was approved for rheumatoid arthritis. This is the first approval, and then this is a study from University of Pittsburgh in JAMA in 2007, and I was really interested in seeing this study. That this is a prospective observational study where almost 5,000 patients of rheumatoid arthritis were prospectively observed for 22 years. And as we know, as that age increases, the risk of diabetes increases, hypertension increases. So here, those rheumatoid patients who are on hydroxychloroquine as compared to those who are not prescribed, if rheumatoid arthritis patients took hydroxychloroquine for 4 years or more, his risk of getting new onset diabetes almost reduced by 77%, which is a substantial thing. And that's how I got interested in this drug in the new indication of diabetes. So this is how we did a phase 3 study where patients who were uncontrolled on metformin and sulfonylurea, we gave one arm hydroxychloroquine, another arm pioglitazone, and we found almost similar reduction in blood glucose. In addition, lipid reduction was found in the hydroxychloroquine arm. So based on this phase 3 studies in 15 medical colleges across India, India was the first country to approve hydroxychloroquine as a first anti-inflammatory drug to be approved in management of type 2 diabetes. Now we know that both type 2 diabetes and atherosclerosis are considered to be having a chronic inflammation playing a major role there. So this is the first approval. Then we did a series of real world as well as phase 4 studies, and we presented at various forums like ADA and the ACE. This is the drug was known to have antiplatelet and antithrombotic effects in the literature, but there was no human study. So we carried out a first human pharmacodynamic study at PGI Chandigarh, and this study is now the most widely referred to study, where it has shown that it has antiplatelet effect, and this effect stems from its inhibiting the arachidonic acid induced platelet aggregation it inhibits. That's the mechanism where the drug acts as an antiplatelet drug. So this is a series of case studies, by the famous orthopedic surgeon Chanley in 1974, published in BMJ, where he showed that it prevents deep vein thrombosis in patients undergoing hip arthroplasty. So this is prior to heparin was available. This drug is being used there to prevent deep vein thrombosis in post-operative setting. So these are some of the studies where antithrombotic effects of hydroxychloroquine in primary antiphospholipid syndrome patients have been described. It lowers the levels of antiphospholipid antibodies, as well as it reverses platelet activation caused by antiphospholipid antibodies. So these are all well-known entities described in literature with this drug. So now coming to the back to COVID-19, the first CQ and SCQ, how the beginning started was, as I told you, it started from Wuhan Institute of Virology, where they showed that in vitro study they showed that in low micromolar concentration, chloroquine inhibited the virus. Then they showed the first clinical results was reported by them, where pneumonia exacerbation was reduced and the disease course was shortened in Chinese patients in Wuhan. Then there was an in vitro study in another Chinese Peking University, where HCQ was found in vitro to be much more potent than CQ in inhibiting the virus growth. So this is after China, the next actually the studies came from Marseille, France, where a small non-randomized study where 20 patients were on hydroxychloroquine alone, 6 patients were on combination of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, and it showed good virological cure in them as compared to patients who were not on any drug and basically the standard therapy without any drug. Then another study from France again showed that 80 mildly infected patients, there was a marked fall in the viral load in the nasopharyngeal swab. Then there was a larger real-world data observational studies of almost 1,061 mild COVID-19 patients where hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin combination was used, and good outcome was shown in almost 91.7% patients. So this was the evidence from France after China. And then subsequently other countries, like this is the Italian study, which showed a good reduction of almost 30% mortality reduction was seen in hospitalized patients who were on hydroxychloroquine versus those who were on the control arm. Then another 2 studies were reported from the New York state, and again, they showed that it showed a good, while early use of hydroxychloroquine showed a good efficacy, and then subsequent study from other countries like Saudi Arabia and Spain, they all showed observational studies showing positive effect and also reduction in mortality. But these were, mind you, these were not the randomized control trial, but they were all observational studies showing beneficial effects on mortality, as well as in the Saudi Arabian studies, they showed that patients, when they were outpatients or prescribed hydroxychloroquine, it resulted into less admission in hospital setting, less admission in the ICU setting, and even reduction in death rate was shown in the Saudi Arabian study. So these are the few positive studies. Then a good number of negative studies have also been reported with hydroxychloroquine. And these have been mainly, we can see that these are all in hospitalized patients and more severe cases where the drug did not show benefit. And another thing is that, the recovery trial in UK, very high dose of hydroxychloroquine was used, almost 2,400 milligram in just almost in less than 48 hours. It's a very high dose which was used by them for some reason which they know best. And this showed negative result, and there was no positivity there. Another thing peculiar to hydroxychloroquine, which Dr. Pandey also referred to, that the drug was politicized to a great extent in the US. First, the President Donald Trump reported that this drug is benefit and there are a lot of mortality occurring. So people can use this drug, and subsequently the FDA gave emergency authorization to the use of hydroxychloroquine, and this was was happening. And then this is the recommendation from Ministry of Health, Government of India, where they described the use of clinical management among the clinical management protocol of COVID-19 guidance. They described the role of hydroxychloroquine, and they said that it should be used in mild cases early during the course of the disease, used during the severe cases, and late should be avoided. And a baseline ECG can be done, and you can monitor it, and you can use this drug. That was the advice of Ministry of Health, Government of India. This was on 3rd July, this advice. So this is the ICMR advisory on hydroxychloroquine earlier in March, and then subsequently they again reconfirmed their advice on 22nd May, where they said that you can use 400 milligram of the drug twice a day on the first day, and then 400 milligram weekly for next 3 to 7 weeks for household contacts of confirmed cases, and for almost 12 weeks or more. Subsequently, they extended for healthcare workers to that. But what was observed was the case control study from ICMR showed that for first 4 weeks there was no benefit. The benefit accrued after 4 to 6 weeks, and after 4 to 6 weeks there was a remarkably good benefit in more than 80% of the cases. So due to this observation and knowing the pharmacokinetic of the drug, that it's a slow-acting drug, and we need to actually 400 milligram once weekly may not be sufficient. We need to use at least 400 milligram twice weekly, so that instead of 4 to 6 weeks that we attain the required concentration, we can achieve it 2 to 3 weeks. So we recommended to use it, instead of just once weekly, which may not be sufficient. We need to use it,
Dr. Parikh, try to finish. We want time for discussion also.
Okay. So this is what was done, and it was this paper appeared in the official journal of ICMR. Then I would like to concentrate now on the safety aspects of the hydroxychloroquine. Adverse event with hydroxychloroquine, which is prior to the COVID era, what we know is basically GI intolerance in 3 to 4% of the cases with acute use, which goes away as you take the drug after food and with a glass of milk. Skin pigmentation and retinopathy, rare cases of retinopathy, these are described on chronic use of the drug. But now, since COVID-19, cardiac side effects are major discussion, and before COVID-19, for last more than 6 decades, there was not much discussion on cardiac adverse effect. That is to be noted. This is how cardiac safety have been questioned of hydroxychloroquine. The US FDA gave an advisory that you need to take only in the hospital setting, don't use in outpatient setting. And while President Trump says that he continues to use the drug, I think so you can see a lot of political undercurrents, and this resulted into that. And then a study in Lancet, which was based on fraudulent data, which was withdrawn. And then WHO, based on that study, which was withdrawn subsequently by Lancet, it recommended to stop the solidarity study which WHO was doing. And then once the study was withdrawn, the WHO reintroduced the drug, and then again that happened. So this is how at this time, when we wrote to the US FDA and EMA and asked them that the drug is there since 6 decades, you should clarify what is there in your database. Why don't you clarify about the cardiac risk? And requested the US FDA and the EMA both to opine on that. Because instead of reporting on individual case reports, better to see the safety database which is there with the US FDA of more than 6 decades. So the Lancet study was
try to finish.
Okay, this
try
is
to finish.
Okay. So this is, I think, the cloud is now on the cardiac safety is just cleared. This is just recently, yesterday a paper has been presented at ESC where arrhythmic effects of hydroxychloroquine in COVID-19 patient has been seen in different clinical settings, in outpatient, in-house, indoor patient, and also in ICU. And this is a large cohort of 649 patients. And what they observed, and they repeated the ECG, and they found that there was a slight QTc prolongation, but this was not associated with any torsade deep pointis or any arrhythmic effects or arrhythmic death. So finally, in COVID-19 also this cloud has been cleared. Many patients were on 2 or 3 other QT prolonging drugs as well in this study. So you can use the drug for the drug is safe for short-term use in COVID-19. So this is hydroxychloroquine in clinical practice, present, as we said, more than 6 decades, and first anti-inflammatory. And safety reporting should be based on the database driven rather than individual adverse events. And I think here the European Medicine Agency has a very nice way of, if you see the prescribed information compared to the US FDA, where you say the adverse event, how common it is written there, and the cardiac adverse effect come into the very rare and not known category. That's the both cardiomyopathy as well as QT prolongation. This comes in the rare, very rare category. It is less than that. It is featuring in the current European medicine prescribing information. So that's how they
Dr. Parekh, please try to finish now. We are getting late for other sessions.
Okay. So this is the University of Florida, which had almost analyzed 13 million cases in the US FDA database, and they did not find any QT prolongation signaling with HCQ. Instead, they found it with azithromycin and in combination with azithromycin. So we don't see this QT prolongation. Practically, we see slight QT prolongation, but we don't see any torsade de pointis so far with this drug. So as compared to cardiac safety signal in COVID-19, which has been voiced here in the setting of rheumatoid and lupus, there is a beneficial cardiovascular effects of this drug have been demonstrated. This is a study published in the American Heart Association Journal, where you can see that there is less MI events in hydroxychloroquine arm compared to non-users of hydroxychloroquine in rheumatoid arthritis patients. This is another study where coronary artery disease incidence over 10 years period has been reduced to the extent of 68% in rheumatoid patients. This is our papers on hydroxychloroquine safety, that it is safe to use in approved.
Dr. Parekh, please conclude now. The other sessions, international faculty will be thereafter.
So I think I would end with this slide that there is a sufficient signal that hydroxychloroquine can have both direct antiviral as well as indirect effect on glucose lowering, antiplatelet, antithrombotic. There are more trials required to evaluate its use in mild and early in the course of the disease, which are not many trials in this setting. And COVID-19 itself is a pro-arrhythmogenic state due to myocardial damage, hypoxia, and hypotension, and electrolyte abnormalities and other QT prolonged indications. And baseline ECG is a very simple tool available, which we can utilize in high-risk patients and use this drug more judiciously. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Insights from the world's best medical minds. You are watching therightdoctors.com.